I've seen a couple people on my Twitter timeline talk about style recently. Things like, how do you get a style, how do you keep it consistent, etc, etc. And that got me thinking, what exactly is an art style? Hi, I'm Kit, and today I'm going to be ranting about art styles, what makes one, and how to polish yours. So without further ado, get yourself something to drink, and let's start this video. At its core, an art style is how the artwork looks, and while I could leave it there and sign off, that would be a huge disservice to this topic. Because, well, yes, art style is in part defined by the finished piece of art, it's not just about the end result, it's also about the multiple avenues one can take to get to said end result. For example, let's look at the big three in art history: Leonardo, Michelangelo, and Raphael. I bring them up because they all have a pretty similar style when you think about it, and that's not just by coincidence. They were all drawing from the same pools of inspirations and were doing similar projects. All three artists made art around the same time period, a time now classified as the High Renaissance in art history. It was also all done in the same area of Italy, that being Florence, and all three artists were often commissioned to make art for either the rich families of Florence or the High Catholic Church. They also worked with very similar materials, that being oil paints, which had a more localized Florence style since its first introduction in the Flanders area of Belgium. And finally, they all knew of each other. They talked to one another and saw each other's projects, most likely when they were, halfway finished with them too. So let's break up all their similarities: time period, localization, patrons, materials, and, in a way, social groups. And I think these 5 things are a good starting point to define a style. Now, obviously, there's plenty of other factors, such as the training and expertise, how long you've been drawing, how burnt out you are, but these are a little harder to solidly define, so we're gonna maybe bookmark this for a later video if there's any want for that. For the category of time period, I think it's best described as your age. As we age, we naturally develop more dexterity, we have rational and logical thoughts develop, more firmly planted beliefs, and get attracted to different ideas. Now, on an individual level, these things can vary from person to person on when they happen, but typically we see people of similar ages doing similar things. For example, we all know that art kid in middle school who did anime and Mary Sue OCs with very many colors and patterns everywhere on them. And that's not an insult because I'm actually just describing what I did in middle school. Next up is location, which I don't think is super relevant to the modern day due to social media, but back in my day, before we had our UTalks and Twittergrams, your location impacted what you made. Location in its modern sense, I think, is mainly limited to what influences you grew up into. Now, with the use of VPNs, we don't have as much region lock content, but that won't change that the kid shows I grew up with were Max and Ruby, and the most international things being outside of animes, which were very localized due to 4Kids Entertainment, would be the British cartoon Charlie and Lola. And that's how it is with a lot of people. Their influences, at least for a portion of time, is limited by their environment. Now, while patrons still exist for commissioning artists, I'm going to broaden this to inspiration, since assumably you are the one deciding what to make in most cases. Now personally, I'm inspired to make cute things, and as such, I follow and watch content creators that make things that I think are cute. An example of this would be Lavender Town on YouTube. She's a major inspiration for me. I don't think it would take someone too long to see that me being a fan of her has impacted my art, because I learned different techniques while watching her. My style isn't hers, but it has been impacted by hers since she's part of my inspiration pool. Next is materials, which is pretty self-explanatory. If you've ever sketched something on paper and then decide to make a digital version of it and then all of a sudden it looks way different, that's the power of materials. Technology is advancing, but typically digital art is going to have a different feel from physical materials, and that's often because digital art doesn't have the same texture or drag that pencils, paints, and papers have. Even so, there is the difference of what kind of brushes someone uses or what program, and how someone's going to do those things physically, but someone using the same technique and same medium is going to have just natural similarities between one another. Now finally, social circles. This kind of encompasses everything we just talked about, because the people you surround yourself with are going to impact who you are, as a person and as an artist. And like I said, I was impacted by watching Lavender Town, so it's no surprise that I'd be impacted by other artists, especially if I'm talking with them. Just seeing other people's drafts can impact how you go about making art because you can learn different techniques, or, oh, that's how you draw hands, I've always been looking how to draw hands like that. And then, if you ask for critique in any of these circles, they're gonna steer you in a different direction than other groups based on, shared aesthetic appeal. One group might say, big eyes are good, and another says, that's not realistic, you gotta shrink those eyes. Style is impacted by multiple factors, and there are plenty more when it comes to how you do art, such as general aesthetic, color palette, etc., etc. But once again, if I tried to dissect all of that right now, we'd be here for hours. And a lot of these things tend to overlap because, much like life, it's not linear or clear, it's more similar to a spiraling spider's web. So now with that little history and breakdown section done, let's get to why you're really here. How do I get a style? And boy, I got some bad news for you guys. You already have one. Technically, however you draw falls into your natural style. If you're really focused in on your collection of work, I'm sure you could see common through lines, be it in material, subject, or other certain aesthetic choices. Personally, when working with real materials and not my iPad, I tend to use pencils and permanent markers, and I like to sketch out full bodies, headshots, and a lot of conceptual behind-the-scene type drawings. These, although often being sketches and out of boredom, show aspects of my style. From the way I handle proportion to things I choose to draw, these share things about who I am as an artist, which style is all about. Okay, so I have a style, but I don't love it. Am I doomed to be like this for the rest of eternity? First, calm down, you're getting too emotional, and that's my job. Second, no, you're not doomed to drawing this way forever. If you need proof of this, find a piece of art from your childhood. Back when you made that drawing, that was your style. That's what you naturally drew, and as you've gotten older, you've gotten more technical skills and your tastes have changed, so naturally your style has followed suit. So if you want to refine your style, or even just switch avenues completely, it's not impossible. Not gonna be the easiest thing in some cases, but as someone who took 2 realism classes when her style is the direct opposite of that, I believe in you. Let's start with the simpler of the two, and the one I have the most experience with. How do you develop an art style over time? There are 2 ways to go about this, and both require practice in drawing, so I'd recommend you get comfortable with sketching more. The first and least helpful way to go about developing a style is have it happen more or less naturally. So this is drawing the same thing over and over again, while tweaking aspects as you go. This is a natural progression, and even seasoned artists fall in this category with art, just changing slightly over time. What they're drawing is almost always recognizable, but putting them together in a timeline, you can see how they've changed. For example, you can tell a Pablo Picasso piece because he has a very distinctive style with the advent of Cubism. But he made art before that, which led to the establishment of Cubism. Picasso could paint pretty good, but we can also see his style that he's known for. It took a while to show in his art. Another example is any animator or comic artist. The character is almost always identifiable as that character. However, if you put their first appearance versus their latest appearance, you can see there's been small changes over time. Like Tsu. The first time I drew her, she had slightly more realistic body proportions. She had broader shoulders, smaller eyes, longer torso, and now when I draw her, she has massive eyes, tiny torso, long legs. These were minor changes that I did over time, but she has always been recognizable as Tsu. Now, if you're pressed for time, this isn't really a great option, especially if you have a hard time breaking away from exact references. But worry not, there is a way to improve it. It's just a bit more intentional. So if this is the case for you, I want you to first make a list of inspiration. Just quickly jot down anyone who comes to mind. Who inspires you? Be it in visual art, storytelling, or whatever else. These don't have to be big-name artists. If you can only think of Twitter artists or mutuals, those work great. And if you can't think of anyone, don't force it, just move on to step 2. For step 2, I want you to ignore step 1 for now. All I want you to do is draw something. I recommend drawing a subject you're comfortable with and a material you're comfortable using. I don't want you to try anything new at this point. We're just trying to get a raw drawing from you. Now, I want you to compare them. Chances are there's similarities between different aspects of those artists and those featured in your drawing. Some artists might have a stronger impact than others, but we want this reference pool because from here you can start focusing on new features to adopt. When you find what you want to change, you now know what you can look at for reference because you already have it written down as a light. Okay, so I'll admit, that's all a bit confusing, so here's a quick case study using me. Step 1, inspirations. My inspirations are Lavender Town, Lauren Faust, Hirohiko Araki, Yana Toboso, Bisco Hattori, and Hiromu Arawaka. I've probably pronounced some of those names wrong, forgive me. Now, this isn't even close to my full list of inspirations, but this will do for now. Step 2, finding out my base style. Here's a couple drawings I've done of Tsu. While I don't really want to apply a new style to her, she's a good reference to how I normally draw. Finally, step 3, comparison. Now, when you look, I clearly draw inspiration heavily from Lavender Town and Lauren Faust. Then minor but still presents are features from Bisco Hattori. Now, visual similarities between me, Araki Toboso, and Arakara are few because although I like their art, I'm more prone to borrowing story themes or elements from them. Now, for a future project, I want a more elegant, less cartoony style. From my list, it would be beneficial for me to look at references of the work of Yana Toboso and Hiromu Arakawa. Their styles blend a bit easier together than they do with Araki's work, so I just need to study and mimic their work until I better understand that style and I'm able to add my own quirks to it. Now, as tedious as that all sounds, you're doing this over a period of time, and the studying isn't going to happen overnight. Now, out of curiosity, could we do this faster? Is that possible? And I'm going to give you a tentative yes, but be warned, if you don't love the style to begin with, this method is not going to necessarily teach you how to love it. Or maybe it will. I don't really know, you're your own person. For this, I'm suggesting a full immersion of this style. Immerse yourself in a style? How do you do that? Well, first, find artists that do art in that style. Fill your visual library with this style. If you can join a group or class that's focused on either this style or learning it, it can also be an amazing resource because you get very specific feedback on what to further improve. Also, watching and reading tutorials on how to do this style can help as well because, you're being taught it. Now, obviously, any of these immersion techniques can benefit you no matter how quick you want a style to develop. Just getting used to a style and practicing it goes a long way. Things like this is why art school can be beneficial. The community plus education can help with learning styles, which can further help with style development outside of class. Now, there's no guarantee you'll master a style just because you went to art school. That mostly comes from practice. I didn't develop a good, strong, consistent style for Sue until after I graduated uni, and that's only because I loved her so much that in senior year I was drawing a full piece of her about once a week. And I can draw her faster now too because of it. Also forced me to learn backgrounds and garbage, but that's not important. So, how do you improve and get comfortable with your style? I'm sorry to say this, but it's mostly going to be practicing and learning to appreciate how you make. Now, that's not to say you can't experiment or change things around, because that's how we learn, grow, and adapt. But the sooner you take note of what you naturally draw, you can better adapt and improve your art to fit what you want. Also, learning when to break away from a reference is hard, but you'll be a lot happier with the resulting pieces when it feels harmonious and not a confused little mashup. And now, I'm speaking from experience for that. I butchered so many anime men in learning this lesson. Even if you don't intend to use a style, if you like it, I'd recommend learning about it. Sometimes things just line up and you can learn a new technique or different ways to apply certain skills. I love line art, and whenever I make a full illustration, I tend to use very prominent line art. However, I had a friend who was learning how to make lineless art, and I happened to find a tutorial about it online. I learned it myself by proxy, and it's become my favorite way to do emotes because the color and shading doesn't have to compete for limited space with thick black outlines. It also helped with a poster I made where a background element was taking up way too much attention when given line art. I knew how to remove the line art in a clean way and how to shade them so they weren't just... Honestly, practice and study are going to be your best bets for improving and developing your art style further. And remember, while learning, there's no shame in tracing or mimicking others' art in your practice. Now, obviously, if you plan to share this work, credit the artist and the work you are referencing and or tracing. And don't sell this work. It's not yours if you're tracing it, but it's okay to do that to learn, because copying the masters is how artists learn for a long time. It helped them to understand the basics before they moved on to their own practices, and it's the same for you. So if you need to trace Garfield to understand how to draw a cartoon cat, that's fine, but you didn't make Garfield. So, in conclusion, how do I develop a style? Practice, study, and just stick in with it. But trust me, you have plenty of time to learn, and people will love your art no matter what, as long as you feel confident.